Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of my podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts, with me, Steve Penny. In this first episode, I'm interviewed by Lizzie Davidson. She talks to me about the growth of Honoris and where we think the future might take us. It's really great to reflect on what we've achieved, and I do hope you enjoy this episode.
So, Steve, firstly, congratulations. It is 5 years since you established Honoris, your building services engineering consultancy. 22nd of August, did you say?
That's right, yeah.
Amazing. For any of you listening who don't know what building service engineering is, because I really didn't the first time that I met you, Steve. Steve and his colleagues design infrastructure for the services in buildings. And so services in buildings is everything that makes a building work, right? Lighting, heating, drainage, power,
data, telecoms,
all
security, of that. Access control, all of those things,
Huge array of things. And you have been a building services specialist your entire career.
Yep.
You just said since the age of 16, which is incredible.
40
Such
years
a wealth
next year.
of knowledge. Wow.
40 years next year. Scary days. But yes, it's true. Yeah.
and so 5 of those years you've been running your own business. We thought when we were talking a few months ago that it might be nice to celebrate 5 years of successful businessing by just having a look at the growth of Honoris from the very first thoughts that popped into your head right the way through to some of your future plans. And so I guess I'd love to start by asking you, Steve, what prompted you to start your consultancy in the first place?
I've been working for other people for quite a long time, for all of my career. So the idea of having my own business had been one that had been in my mind for well over 20 years, I would say, up to the point that the last business I was working for, we had some redundancies, and unfortunately I was one of the people made redundant. But I felt at that time, I was 50 years old, it was either now or never for starting my own business. And I'd also, through the years of working in New Zealand, built some really strong client relationships, and I got some backing from a couple of the clients that they would be willing to work with me if I wanted to set up on my own, and which gave me some confidence that I would be, hitting the ground running to some extent. And I had a chat with my family, had a chat with some friends, and started to look at whether working for myself is really what I wanted to do. I'm very nervous to start with, I have to say, because it was a very new experience. I wasn't quite sure whether it'd be successful or not, but once we got going and once I started getting some work from a couple of clients and realised that there was plenty of work out there, it sort of the nerves started to go away, and then I started to really plan what I wanted to do with the business, because right at the start it was, well, let's see what happens first and then we'll go from there. And then it started finding out all the things you don't know when you work for somebody else. You don't know how to do your invoicing because somebody else does that for you, and you don't know how to set up your website and how to arrange email addresses and all of those other things you need when you set up a business. I suddenly realized there was lots of gaps in my knowledge. That was something that I found quite challenging, and something I think a lot of people, when they start out on business, they know what they do for a day job, but all the other bits that you need to actually run a business, most of us don't have that knowledge, and you very quickly realize that there's quite a lot more to running a business than just doing what you normally do.
Totally.
And that's the point at which I realized I needed to get some help. So I started searching for people that were subject matter experts in the areas that I wasn't. So finding people like yourself with help with the copy on the website, and my bookkeeper Sarah, who's fantastic at what she does, and she's also much more than a bookkeeper. She's more of a management accountant and provides me with some guidance on what I'm doing right and what I'm not doing right financially in the business, and helps me understand the metrics and all that kind of. Then I found a small IT company to help me set up the computers and the network and everything else, and so finding those people to support me has been a big part of the success as well, I would say.
Yeah, you're so right. Those partners are just worth their weight in gold. Hey,
absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, most of the things you could probably do for yourself, but you end up spending a long time doing them, and while you're doing them, you're not doing the job that actually earns you the money.
That's exactly right.
Your hours spending doing 2 hours spending doing invoicing that somebody else could do in 10 minutes is a waste of 2 hours, really. And so that's kind of the view that I took, that there's better ways to spend my time than trying to do all the business stuff that I'm not very good at.
That is incredibly wise. What stage of your business were you at when you decided that you were going to start bringing in expert help?
It was probably fairly early on. When I wanted to set the business up, Sarah's actually the wife of an architect that I know, and he sort of encouraged me to get the business going, James, and introduced me to his wife Sarah when I was thinking about I needed to find somebody to do my books and do those kind of things. And Sarah then helped me set the business up and put me in touch with a couple of other people, like finding a proper, a full chartered accountant to do the bookkeeping, do the accounts at the end of the year was the next thing I had to try and think about. But then it was just me talking to people that I knew and finding out who they knew that might be able to help with different things. So I found somebody who could help me with the website, and then I found somebody else who could help me with the IT, but just by trawling through the internet and looking for people and phoning a few people up and seeing how they came across on the phone, and then meeting them and then making a decision about whether or not they were the right people to partner with for the bits and pieces I needed. So it was just kind of all fairly early days, because I realised fairly quickly that there was things I needed and wanted to do that I just didn't know where to start.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I think a lot of business owners force themselves to bootstrap for far longer and run themselves into the ground a bit in the process. Brilliant. Now, when we met, Steve, it was up at the sign of the Takahe, wasn't it?
It was,
yes. At a LinkedIn
gin tasting
networking event. A gin tasting evening, that's right. Yes, that was fun. Yes, we should get Michael to do another one. I remember you telling me about what you did. And I remember your eyes lighting up when you started to talk about energy efficiency, which is so beautiful. I just love that spark when people start to talk about the thing that's really, dear to their hearts. Yeah. And energy efficiency is really at the heart of so much of what you do.
It is,
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you how that began, how you became interested in energy efficiency in the context of buildings in the first place.
Well, I'd say that it's probably been there for most of my career. That I think the design process, as I was taught it in the UK, you look to try and design systems that are energy efficient. You don't try and design systems that are wasteful, because if you put in too big a system, it takes up too much room, costs too much money for one thing, but also it doesn't work as well, and you end up wasting energy, which is another cost. So that's sort of the starting point was always the systems that I'm designing. I want them to be as efficient as they can be. But when fairly early in my career, so in the mid-90s, so I've been working for about 12 years by this point, I went to work for a company called Atelier 10, and where Patrick Bellew had founded that company about 5 years prior to me joining, I think it was. And his philosophy was much more holistic than mine. I was focusing on the stuff I was designing, and he opened my eyes to the idea that actually when you're designing a building, it should design the whole thing together, so that all of the systems work together and not against one another. And if you do that, then you really are starting to get into a more sustainable design solution, and you get much better outcomes for everybody. The building users feel better because the building itself works more comfortably, and the lighting is good. The visuals out through the windows are good. You don't get too much sunlight coming into the building, making it hot. You don't lose too much heat in the winter, making the building cold, and all of those things kind of work together. And that's really where I started to realise that there was more to designing a building than just putting a heating system in and a ventilation system in and all those bits and pieces that was kind of the normal run-of-the-mill stuff that we do. And I've tried to carry that through and treat the buildings as a complete, I don't know what the phrase I would use actually, like a living organism, I guess, almost, that every part of it works together. And if you consider that in each of the design stages, then you find out that you get a much better outcome and a much more efficient building, and cheaper to run and operate and maintain, and all the other good things that form part of the process.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about how it's just a much nicer experience for the people in the building as well. That makes perfect sense.
Well, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. The services aren't there because we want them to be. We're there to do a job, and that job is to make the people in the building comfortable doing whatever they need to do in that building. So does it help them do their job, or does it not? If it's not, then it's not designed properly. So that's part of the philosophy as well, that we've got to consider the users as part of the design process. Yeah. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that there's human beings in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like some of the buildings that, I've spent time in over my life, they were, I don't think the human inhabitants were considered that much,
No.
Yeah.
Lots of glazing, looks nice from the outside, but not very comfortable on the inside.
That's right. And you could so tell the difference between the buildings where the people had been considered and the ones in which they were kind of absent from that process. Yeah. And so that work with Patrick at Atelier 10, that sounds like it was really formative for you, Steve.
I would say so, yeah.
Were there some key projects that you're particularly proud of from that era?
I guess, yeah, the Kimberlin Library would be one. It's, I've talked to Patrick a few times about that recently as well. It was a system, we used a system in that building called Thermodec, which is basically a hollow core concrete slab, and you put air through the slab and it goes into the space. And what it does then is it acts as a thermal store. So the building fabric effectively becomes a thermal store, releasing energy over time, slowly over time, which meant you needed to put much less energy into the building and it would maintain very stable internal conditions. Because one of the key things about comfort is that it's not hot or cold that makes you uncomfortable, it's the change. So if you go into a space and it's constantly at 18 or 19 degrees, you get used to it over a fairly short period of time and then you feel comfortable. If it's varying between 18 and 24, you feel hot and cold.
Yeah.
And it's the actual variation in temperature that causes the discomfort rather than the temperature itself. And also added to that is if you've got a lot of air movement, so it's very drafty, you can feel uncomfortable as well. So the advantage of the Thermodec system is it much lower air volumes, much less air movement, therefore fewer drafts, and also a much lower energy. And that building, we designed it so that it didn't actually need radiators, but we weren't quite brave enough not to put the heating in. So we put the heating in and then they've never turned it on. So it's never used it.
And when did that building open?
Oh, it's been open since about 98. So it's been open for quite a long time. Never been heated. No, all of the energy it needs comes through the ventilation system, which is, it's heated by a domestic sized boiler, and it's about a 2,000 square metre floor plate building. So it's 10 times the size of your house and with a same size boiler.
That's amazing. And I'd just like to remind people that this is the UK we're talking about, that famous tropical place. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And that was in Leicester. So it's not on the balmy south coast either. So that, and there's another project we worked on. Actually, after I'd left Atelier 10, I worked on a project for River Island Clothing Company, which there was their new headquarters building, and we looked at doing ground source heating, which is something that's fairly common over here, but in the UK wasn't common at the time.
No, I'd never heard about it before coming to New Zealand. It's very
so that's early 2000s, I think this was, and we basically drilled a whole load of holes in the ground and pumped water out those holes through a heat pump and used that to heat and cool the building. And we had a very low energy displacement ventilation system in that building as well. That was a really good design. It was a big warehouse building that we turned into offices and workspaces for the fashion designers and others. And that was really quite a successful project as well. And I really enjoyed working on that one. And we also did a project when I was still at Atelier 10. We did the project for the Baltic Flour Mills, which is up in Gateshead, I think it is, right on the river, converting it from a flour mill to an art gallery.
Oh, amazing.
So that, that was a massive internal volume space. We added in some mezzanine floor areas and then close control air conditioning for the art spaces as well. So that was another one that was, it's a really iconic building, still there, still doing its job some 20, 25, nearly 30 years later. So, it's that sort of design, when you know that it's going to be there for a while, you start to think about the whole of life side of things rather than just focusing on what's the cheapest solution for today. You start to think what do we want, how long does the building need to last, and what's the best system to put in to make sure it's going to reach that goal. And I think we kind of lose sight of that sometimes. We're trying to find a quick, cheap fix a lot of the time. And it's like anything. If you buy a cheap pair of shoes, you'll replace them 15 times before the more expensive pair of shoes that you didn't want to buy because they were too expensive will have worn out.
Absolutely.
It's that kind of philosophy, really. I think we sometimes get caught in that trap.
We do, and I think we particularly do in New Zealand because budgets are often quite tight. Hey,
they are, but we still, we have operating budgets and capital budgets, and they are the same pool of money. And what you spend on the capital, if it reduces the operating cost, then there's a balance there.
Yeah.
So that's something that we need to sort of focus on more, I would say.
I think that's we've talked about that before, and I completely agree with you. It's that short-termism. And just, even just thinking about those projects that you've just mentioned, the long-term view that you took with all of those, that's much rarer here.
It is, yeah.
It's like that, yeah.
I think that was the big thing for me was working with clients who had that view as well, that they wanted these buildings to be something that they would stay operating in them for a long time. So they were willing to make that investment because they could see the advantage to them.
Yeah.
If you're talking to developers who want to build the building and then flick it on to somebody else, there's no benefit for them
Yes.
in putting more investment into the building itself. It reduces their profit margins. So what you really want is you want owner occupiers, because then there's more of a vested interest in managing the whole of life cost rather than just the first cost.
Great point. Point. I love that. So with budgets and maybe vision, not quite as long-term and holistic here in New Zealand, but there must have been some sustainable project highlights for you since you started your business, or at least I do hope so, because I know this is still very dear to your heart.
It is, yes. Working with the big universities here in Christchurch, Lincoln and University of Canterbury has been great. We've been involved with both of those tertiary education spaces with building the strategy for removal of coal from their campuses, because both are currently heated with coal, and they both have relatively short-term plans to move off of coal and move on to more sustainable heating solutions.
That is wonderful.
For UC, we were doing a lot of work around the business case and building a long-term plan for the campus, and master planning the energy across the campus, which was quite a challenging exercise. That campus is very big. It's 200,000 square meters of buildings, which is a lot of building property, and quite a lot of that property is aged as well. So it's 1950s, 1960s builds, which basically means it's not very good. Not a lot of insulation. Not a lot of good glazing, and so heating is a challenge. And come back to my earlier point that because the building fabric's not up to current standards in a lot of cases, the temperature varies inside the spaces very quickly. If it gets cold outside, it gets cold inside very quickly. So you get those variations in temperature which make the building uncomfortable. And that's one of the things that we were looking to try and address. So part of the strategy was looking at upgrading the building's fabric as a first step to make them work better as buildings, and then looking at what we do with the heating systems after that, rather than just trying to put in a heating system to deal with all the losses with walls. Let's stop the losses first, and then you don't need to put as big a heating system in, which reduces your energy bills anyway. So it's that kind of joined up thinking is really good to see. And UC is a great client, and they are owner occupiers. They pay the bills for all of the buildings, so they can see the real benefit in that process and that approach. So that was really cool.
So cool. And where are they at with
they're in the implementation at the moment. So they're converting their existing boiler as a temporary measure to allow them to transition from coal. They're converting the boilers to a wood chip based fuel. And they're also starting to convert the buildings across from that boiler plant onto a ground source heat pump solution. So they're starting to do what we had planned for. And there's a few years of work to do to get all of the buildings across, but the process has started, and it's good to see. We're sort of in the depths of the same kind of process with Lincoln at the moment. So we've been working with Lincoln since 2021 for two and a half years now, I think it is. We've been working on those projects, and we're right into the depths of design on stage 3 and 4 of their decarbonisation project. So that's keeping us busy right now, and that's basically the same principle that we're trying to get rid of the coal and looking at individually heating each of the buildings and taking them off of the central heating system, which provides them with some more resilience in their system, but also gets rid of the carbon footprint that their coal boilers are currently producing. So it's really good that we're involved in those projects, because they are they're going to be important for the two campuses over the coming years.
Hugely important. And how does Lincoln stack up to UC in terms of its building stock? Has it got the same issue with old? I would say
pretty similar. Yeah, I mean, they've been around for a long time, those universities, and they've got a lot of older buildings. UC had a number of the buildings that they lost through the earthquakes that have now been rebuilt with much better stock, and Lincoln's had a couple of those as well. But Lincoln, I think, fared quite a bit better through the earthquakes, so their buildings lasted better. They haven't had the injection of insurance money that they've had some, but not the same extent that you had at UC, where a number of buildings actually had to be shut and demolished. So they're similar standards, I would say, for some of the building stock, and they're taking a similar approach that they need. Where the buildings are really poor quality, they're getting rid of them and putting new buildings in, and where they're okay, they're keeping them, and a slightly longer term plan for those buildings. So it's good. It's a good process for sure.
And you've mentioned a really great aspect of these projects has been the way that you're working with owner occupiers, and they are taking that holistic holistic viewpoint.
Yeah.
Are there any other, I guess, key learnings or key interest points from these two projects that would be, interesting to share? Because I'm just mindful that some of the people listening to this might, also have large campuses that they take care of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to have a long-term plan. That, the first thing that we did with UC and with Lincoln is to sit down with them and look at what their ultimate goal was. Where were they right now, and where did they want to get to? We did that in a bit more detail with UC than we did with Lincoln, but that approach is really important because it then sort of defines what steps you need to take to get from where you are to where you want to be. And one of the things we identified for UC is that we didn't want to increase the electrical load too much across the campus, because increasing their electrical infrastructure was going to be an extremely costly exercise. And so we were looking at ways of staging the development so we could improve the efficiency of the buildings, reduce the electrical loads, and then bring the heat pumps in so that we weren't increasing an overall increase in the loads. And that took a bit more planning. That's less of an issue for LU. So they've taken a slightly different approach there, which is, let's not say it's not always the same solution. And we need to be open to different approaches to make sure we get the right outcome for everybody, really. But I would say that future planning, understanding what the ultimate goal is absolutely key to any strategy, really, whether it's energy or whatever it may be.
Yeah, definitely. And again, that big picture take, is
absolutely
really critical. Yes. So is it, and it's interesting that you've talked about two projects where you have taken a big picture, long-term approach to a big building services upgrade, because I wondered, is it easy to convince New Zealand businesses and institutions, like you talked earlier about it being tough to convince property developers to take a longer term perspective? Overall, is it easy to convince New Zealand businesses and customers to do this?
I'd say that view is changing.
Good.
And it is changing for the better.
Yeah.
But for quite a while, I've been here since 2010 for the most of that time. Most people have the right idea. We want to look at how we can build slightly more sustainably and what can we do to make the building better. You end up with a shopping list of things that can be applied to the building. But the problem is usually the building's already kind of designed before they start thinking about these sustainability things. So you're coming into the piece a little bit too late. Really, we should be, my view is we should be getting involved before they've even started to plan out the shape of the building.
Yes, of course.
So that we can have some input into the building orientation, if possible, some input into the building fabric, the glazing, external shading, all those other things that are, you pay for them right at the start of the building. There's no operating cost because they're just part of the building. Yes. And they reduce your requirements in terms of energy and lighting and other things as well. So, that there's some missed opportunities there because as building services engineers, we're kind of, in New Zealand, you very much stick to your lane, and building services, you do the heating, the cooling, the lighting, the power. You don't get involved in the building fabric. But really, my view is that we should be involved in the building, not just parts of it. And then, we can give advice on what gives the best bang for the buck, really. If you spend a bit more money on insulation and a bit more money on glazing, you don't have to spend as much money on cooling and heating and lighting. So there's a balance, and sometimes those opportunities are missed. But when we do get to a point where we're looking at solar photovoltaics on the roof of the building for generating power, or we're looking at rainwater harvesting systems or things of that nature, what you tend to find is, because we've got this split between capital and operating budget, that if there's a cost problem, the project's over budget, the things that come off the list first are those sustainable items, because that's a capital cost that is cheaper to do it another way that's less sustainable. And so you tend to find that those items are taken off the list first, which is a bit of a short-term view. But I can understand it if you've got real limitations on your capital budget. Something that is good for the operating of the building but is more expensive than a standard approach is kind of a luxury in some cases. But I think the problem is that we make that decision too often and we miss out on a lot of opportunities as a result of that. But that is starting to change. We're starting to see some, I've heard today that there's some legislation in consultation with the MB at the moment about building better buildings, which is more focused on our carbon footprint as a country and making sure that we're taking our responsibilities in that space more seriously. And hopefully that will help to drive some better design decisions, because if there's some legislation there that says you've got to do this, otherwise otherwise there's penalties to be paid, whatever those penalties may be, or your building may not get building consent or whatever it may be, then you will start to see some real change, I think. So that's something I'm keen to see.
Yeah, definitely. That's very encouraging. And why is it, Steve, that you're not being brought in at the beginning of the process? Because it seems to me to be so obvious that makes sense. You're going to save money. It's going to be more efficient. You're going to get better outcomes.
I think it's just it's the process in New Zealand is
right.
That you'll bring your architect on board early doors, and they will do a concept for you, and they'll do they'll span out the building based on what the client thinks they need in the space, and then you'll probably get a structural engineer involved to try and put some structure in it, and then after that's done and the building form is kind of decided and the orientation's decided and the structure's decided, then they'll bring the building services in, because that's just kind of the normal process, unfortunately, which means that by the time we get involved, anything we want to change is a variation to what's already been designed.
Of course. Which
and
is
then
nonsense.
It becomes a cost issue and a planning time issue, and it's that process is just the way it is in New Zealand, really.
So in order to change that, you'd have to re-educate architects and
just change the process. Hey? I wouldn't necessarily say you need to. I suppose it's re-education in as much as looking at an earlier stage of input from people, rather than just thinking, oh, well, you're only going to do the heating and lighting, so therefore you don't need to know anything until the building's shape sorted out. Well, there's actually some value we can add at that very early stage that may actually help. And we're starting to see. I'm starting to see some clients getting us engaged in that space. For example, the stuff at UC we did around the early master planning on the energy use was part of that process, looking at where's the expansion expected on the campus. What do we need to do to make sure the infrastructure's there to deal with that expansion, and making sure that they're thinking about things like that at the start of the process. So that is starting to happen, but it's very few clients that actually do that at this point.
So
but hopefully more in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something you'd like to get the word out about. And I'm just thinking back to what we were talking about how critical what you do is to the experience of people who occupy those buildings and live and work in them. You're far more than building services engineers in a way. You're kind of like the building experience engineers.
There's lots of different terms that are used, and one of the ones is environmental engineers, because we engineer the environment.
You do,
it's there is an aspect of that to it, and I think sometimes we kind of hide our light under a bushel to some extent. We don't want to brag about what we do too much, and we miss some opportunities because of that. I think we have a kind of a moral obligation to make sure the buildings are working as efficiently as possible, because we're in the middle of a climate crisis, and the more energy we use in buildings, the worse that crisis is going to get. So we need to be thinking much more holistically about what we're doing, because by not doing that, we're putting our own future at risk, really. And I think there's a lot more that we can do as an industry. I'm not saying that we're not doing some good stuff, because we definitely are as an industry, but there's more that we could be doing for sure.
And this legislation, this impending legislation, will be a good start, I guess, to raise
awareness. Hopefully, yes. Yeah.
I guess, can you think of other ways that we could potentially evolve the way we're building here to be better, to be more sustainable?
Well, I think there's a lot of information available from overseas about how to do low energy design. There's a lot of information out there. I mean, you're starting to see the introduction of things like passive house design in New Zealand, which is very low energy housing, and some of the principles for that would apply to commercial spaces as well. And there's no reason why they shouldn't. We need to be a bit less reluctant to use overseas experience, because I do think there's quite a resistance to overseas standards and experience being used in New Zealand. We want to do it our way.
Why is that, do you think, Steve?
Not being a born and bred Kiwi, I don't really know the answer to that question. I've been an expat for almost 20 years, so I'm used to working in other countries and bringing my experience with me where I go. I'm not really sure why there is a reluctance, but there does seem to be a bit of reluctance to use stuff that's been tried and tested overseas without redoing it over here in a completely starting from scratch and redesigning it and then saying it's ours. I think it's a little bit, can be a little bit frustrating. But I think there's some changes in that space as well. Like I say, the passive house stuff coming in, which is really good. And but I think the other issue that New Zealand has, which is geographical. We're a long way away from most things, and we don't necessarily have the same kind of access as you get in Europe to different solutions, because there's a limited number of suppliers for equipment, and we have to make do with what we can get. And that, I think, is holding New Zealand back to some extent as well. That there's, we are at the bottom of the world and kind of almost forgotten about sometimes. And I think that doesn't help us. So I think there's a level of innovation we need to make the stuff that we've got work better. And I think part of that is going to be looking at what's done overseas and seeing how we can adapt what we've got, or adapt rather what we've got here to work in the same way. And I think there's more of that to be done, for sure. Looking at the building fabric and looking at glazing and looking at external shading and looking at building orientation. All of those things are relatively easy to do in New Zealand. When you start to look at other types of plant and systems, that's when it starts to get more difficult, because we do only have half a dozen suppliers. So that's what you've got, which is can be a bit frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But what you're saying is there's so much we can do to make buildings better environments before you get to the stage of what actual plant are we going to put in it for the heating and cooling, etc. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. But in here, in New Zealand, there must be some projects that we have done well. Like, are there any that you are personally inspired?
Well, you look at what we're doing with things like the new Central Library in Centre Christchurch. That's a really great design, and lots of energy efficiency elements in that building as well. And I think it's a really good building. I think the conference centre is the same. It's an amazing building. There's been a lot of effort put into making sure that can be as green as it can be. And I think the Justice and Emergency Services Precinct building is technologically it's really challenging because of its purpose. And I think it's got a lot of stuff in there that's really high-end engineering design. So that's there's lots of good stuff that is being done. I think that there's just, from a sustainability perspective, there's probably more that we can do. And I think we need to be honest. I think we're going to miss our carbon reduction targets for 2050 if we carry on as we are at the moment, which is that's a global requirement that we hit those targets, and we're quite a long way off. And I think that there's a lot of effort to go in from everybody, really. One of the other things I think that we all need to start being more accountable for what we do, and the impact that we have, and make better decisions about where we buy products from. Do you really need to have a TV in every single room in your house? Do you really need to have 3 cars parked outside when there's only 2 of you? Those kind of, because that's the kind of thing that we do because we can. Yeah. But the reality is, by doing that, we are contributing to the problem.
Absolutely.
And those sort of things are all things that really need to be thought about better by all of us. Luxury items. How many luxury items do you really need? And it's a different mindset. But talking to people I've been talking to recently, that's the things we need to start thinking about. Because if we take the demand for those things down, we're immediately starting to have a positive impact. And I think that's a much bigger picture thing. But that's kind of where we're at now. I think the countries. New Zealand's lucky it hasn't had too many extreme weather events. But you look at the rain we just had in Queenstown. Yeah, it's not a good thing. And the flooding we've had on the west coast, and the flooding we've had in Nelson and up on the North Island, and all of those events used to be much less common than they are now.
That's exactly right.
And that's our fault.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are still I don't think many people are actively in denial in that they're saying this isn't happening. There's still the odd idiot, but most people are like, okay, this is happening, but then there's a disconnect between that acknowledgement and changing.
Well, it's a case of thinking, well, there's not a lot I can do, so it's not really going to make any difference. And the trouble is, if everybody thinks like that, you're right, it won't. But if everybody thinks, actually, instead of driving the car from here to the shops, which are a 10-minute walk away, I'm going to walk. Instead of buying that second TV, I'm going to, I don't know, do something else instead. I'm going to put some solar panels on the roof or whatever it may be, making those better decisions so that you're a net gain to the environment rather than a net loss. And I think that's really that's really where we need to start being accountable, I think.
I love that. And if we were to look at, I guess, if you as an expert in this area were to give some advice on sustainable buildings, making our buildings and our surroundings more sustainable to, building owners, to developers, even to just people like me who own their own home, have you got some tips that you would share with people?
I think any decision you're making around a building needs to be a long-term decision. So you need to be thinking that, for example, if you're a developer and you're looking to get a new building built, look at what the life expectancy of that building is. Is it, because it might be saying, we really only want it for 10 or 15 years. Well, why not make it 50 years? Because the thing about one of the issues you've got is embedded carbon, and embedded carbon is the carbon that is required to build the building. So it's what's used, every piece of material has got some level of carbon input into it because of the process to make that material. And then you've got the process of building it into a building, and that adds more carbon into the mix. So once you've done that, if you're then going to knock it down in 15 years time and put something else up, then you've got that same embedded carbon issue again. Whereas if you make that building last for 50 years, the amount of carbon involved is spread over a longer time.
Yes.
So your impact overall is much less, and making buildings so that they can be repurposed rather than designing a building that can only do one thing, so it can only ever be used for that purpose, you then seriously limit its life expectancy. So you need to be thinking, we all need to be thinking, how can we make this building so that it's flexible and can be used for other purposes without major rebuilding work? And that kind of approach is, I think, starting to happen, but we need to see more of that as well. I think we've got, and it's not just a New Zealand thing, this is a global thing. This is everywhere needs to be doing the same, that we need to be planning for a long-term future in our buildings. And the other thing that is widely talked about elsewhere in the world, and is partially talked about over here but not as much as it should be, is walkable communities. So you build a community where everything you need, the shop where you need to get your food and other things, the work where you need to go to, the schools that your kids need to go to, all of those things, all the amenities you need are within walking distance of your house. Take away the need for a car.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got many places around the world where their urban development is all around pedestrianising things, making it so everything is close by, and it immediately reduces the pollution in the air around you. So the spaces are much healthier because of that. And it's things like that we need to be doing here as well. We're heavily reliant on our cars in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a non-driver, which is very rare in New Zealand, and I can do so because I live in an urban centre that's well served with public transport. And I live in Littleton, which is a walkable community. But I'm very fortunate, there's not that combination of circumstances isn't available to everyone.
Not for everyone, no. It would be an hour and a half for me to walk from here to my work.
Right, that's a bit tough, Steve.
Which
you could do it.
In the summer's not too bad, or in the morning in the summer not too bad, but in the winter when it's raining and cold, not so much fun.
No.
Exactly. That's the sort of thing that I think we've got a bit too much sprawl. We're spreading ourselves out a bit too much, and that sort of higher urban density is something that is something we all need to start getting used to. And it doesn't mean you have to live in a little cell with no view. It just needs better planning. We need to be thinking about urban planning much better than we are, and making sure that we're not just building more and more roads, because that's bad after bad, really.
Bad after bad is a great way of putting it. Yeah. So what else? So walkable communities, longer term views. I think
the bigger thing really is also to make sure you've got a clear vision for what your building needs to do, because as the designers of the building, if the client isn't really 100% clear what they want the building to do, it's really difficult to provide an appropriate design solution. So spending a bit of time at the start of the process properly understanding how you're going to use the building and what the real requirements are, and making sure that the design team has a very clear brief is the best way to get the best outcome. And one of the things things that we try to focus on when we get involved with projects is spending that time with the client and interrogating their design process. What is it that you're trying to achieve, and making sure we get a really clear brief, and then that brief we send back to the client, say these are the things we think we need to do, and if they don't understand it, we'll explain to them what the different implications are, and by going through that process at the start of every job, you get a better outcome. Because I think us as engineers, we have a habit of thinking we know the answer before we've asked the question. It's an office space. I've always done office spaces like this, so I do this office space like this. But is it really exactly the same as the last one? And if you don't ask the right questions, then you're going to potentially going to design the wrong thing. It may not work as efficiently as it should, may not be as comfortable as it needs to be, may not meet the client's requirements in some other way. Totally. So that, I think that briefing process is very important, and it's true of any design process, any process really.
Yeah, and you do a really great job on that. I remember you shared a couple of your briefing documents with me when I was writing your web copy, and I was really impressed with the thoroughness of them, and the thoroughness and the accessibility. Like, they were very easy to read. So high five, because not everyone does such a good job on that.
Well, I think the other thing we're good at as engineers is speaking in engineer, which not everybody understands engineer. So sometimes some translation is needed, and I think I'm quite fortunate that I can translate normally to real English from engineer and help clients to understand what the implications of what they're asking for actually really are.
You are very, very good at that.
So that's good. That's my job, so I need to be good at it.
Any tips for people building with climate change in mind? Because summers are getting hotter, winters are getting more unpredictable, weather's getting more unpredictable as a whole. How should we be building?
But I think the big challenge is, how do we maintain a separation between the internal and the external environments? Because that's that issue that we have really in housing at the moment, is that if it's cold outside, it's cold inside. If it's warm outside, it's warm inside. There's no real separation. And it's not just that. You've also got issues around condensation. You've got issues around drafts, because windows are not built, not always built as well as they could be, and all of those things. So the first thing that the building fabric should do is separate the inside from the outside, and that sometimes we miss that step, and then everything after that is a bit of a fight, to be fair. So I think climate change. Climate change is a real issue for all of us, and sensible design requires us to make sure that we try and keep outside as much as possible, and that doesn't just apply to the temperature, it also applies to the wind, it applies to the rain, it applies to dust and dirt and other things. So if you can control the amount of the outside air that comes into the building and filter it and clean it, then you get less issues with respiratory disease from all of the particles that are blowing around inside the house, things like that. So that is it's part of what we all need to be doing. And if we were building buildings to a good standard, then the external environment should have very little impact on the internal environment. And that's kind of the purpose of the building, really, is to try and stabilize inside from outside. Unless it's a shed, then it doesn't really matter. But if it's somebody's house, or if it's an office, or if it's a medical facility, separating inside from outside is absolutely key to its function.
Yes, absolutely. As someone who lives in essentially 100-year-old shed, all of those circumstances are very familiar to me. So
yes.
It's very picturesque.
It's good.
Yeah, no, it's great. So 5 years, where are you going in the next 5, Steve? What's your vision?
Yeah, what's my vision? My vision for Honoris is I'm in my own small way, I'm trying to lift the standard of what we do as building services engineers. I think we tend to be maligned quite a lot, because we're seen as the causer of problems, because we come into the design late, and we change things because we need to put plant spaces in and risers in and things like that, after the architect's already done their concept and got it all nicely laid out. So that sort of causes some friction, and I think we need to try and educate our clients about the benefits of getting us involved earlier in the piece, and that's part of what I'm trying to do with my business. But also I think it's just trying to be leaders in some way in that sustainability design. design and trying to get more influence over how we design the buildings as a whole, rather than just the building services, which is something I'm really passionate about doing. And I think that there's some real advantages to us all if we can get that piece of design process correct. And I'm not saying that architects can't do their job very well, because they can, absolutely they can. But it's just about trying to provide some advice at an early enough stage, so that we don't end up with the potential for a redesign later on in the project because we missed an opportunity.
Absolutely. And,
or we don't have that opportunity because a redesign is going to be too expensive and too time consuming. So it's just making sure that we're making the most out of the opportunities that there are. And I think we can add some real value in that space if we get the opportunity to do so.
You definitely can. And I think architects, they are absolute experts in their field and appreciated as such, and therefore they would hopefully be the first to say and appreciate your expertise and what you can add to the picture. And I think it is just back to that thing that you said, that it's just not common practice here to bring you in at the beginning of the process, but that's very easy to change.
I mean, it's something that I think we can, we as engineers can add some more value than we currently do. So I think we should, personally. And it's not just Honoris, it's all of us engineers have other areas that we can influence in a positive way, that we should be doing our best to do that whenever we get the chance. And we'll see. It's it feels like pushing a big boulder up a hill at the moment, but I'm sure there's something in that. But there you go.
But if you looked back at like 5 years ago when you started your business, have you seen any improvement in that time?
I think we're starting to get some improvement for sure. I think that the feedback we get as a business is pretty much exclusively positive. We've not had any. I'm not aware of any negative feedback about what we've done from anybody at this point, which I think is a good thing. It shows that we're doing something right if we're not getting told we're doing it wrong. But I am actively seeking that feedback as well. I want clients to tell us if there's something that we need to change, because ultimately we're only as good as our last job, and if we're not getting feedback about things we're doing wrong, we're likely to do them wrong again. So I think that that continuous feedback's really important for us as a business.
It is really important. And New Zealanders can sometimes be a little loath to seek situations that might be a little confrontational, so they can be a bit poor at giving constructive feedback. So it's great that you're seeking that actively. If you were, and I love this question because it was always so thought-provoking. It's like, if you could go back in time, and sit down with yourself 5 years ago when you were just about to start your business, what would you say to past you?
If you was asking me this question a year ago, the answer would have been don't bother. But because I think like a lot of businesses, the last couple of years through the COVID experience has been quite challenging for a lot of different reasons.
Definitely.
And I think that it's what's helped me through that, though, is from my own point of view, having a longer view, having a vision of where I wanted to be, has allowed me to focus on that and see that there is a target I'm aiming for, and it has helped me get through some difficult times within the business. So I think the advice I would give is focus on that ultimate goal. Where you want to get to, focus on that, and if you keep the focus on that, then everything else will fall into place. Because if you don't, what I'm really conscious of is, you don't have that vision, then when things get difficult, you can kind of lose your way. If we didn't know where we wanted to be in 5 years' time, then maybe I would have shut the doors on the business because it was hard last year. But that wasn't what I did, because I knew where I wanted to be, and I knew that making my business successful was the only way I was going to get there. So that having that sort of driving force, I guess, and being very clear on what I need to do to get there has been a saving grace for me in the business. And it's meant that I have focused on how when things have got difficult, what's the best way to get around this hurdle, rather than thinking, it's too difficult, I'll turn back and go, I'll do something else. I've actually found a way through, which I think has been ultimately why we're now in a position where we're looking to grow the team, and we've got good workload ahead of us, and we're building a strong reputation because we've managed to keep things going. And I think that's probably a rambling answer to your question.
Big congratulations on getting through those tough times. I know that last year and this year has been a really tough time for a lot of people. And particularly in the building industry, I think like the tail effect of COVID and then followed by, the recession has just not been ideal.
No, definitely not. No.
But for you, like keeping touch with that vision of wanting to be leaders in that sustainable building space and wanting to do your bit to lift the quality of building service engineering. That was what pulled you through, hey?
That and also that that there's I've got a team of people around me that are really strong engineers in their own right.
Yes.
And I wanted to make sure that that they had the best chance to be successful as well. That there's a lot. I'm of the view that I want to surround myself with people that are better at my job than I am, because
Beautiful.
that's how you improve, isn't it? If you bring in people that are worse than you, then the quality is going to drop. If you try and bring in people who are better than you, then the quality is going to rise. And that's what it's about for me, and making sure that we've got a strong team and that we bring in the right kind of people to strengthen that team as we go forward as well. And that's hopefully we're being successful in that space. But it's a daily challenge to make sure we're keeping everybody busy and everybody happy.
It is a daily challenge, and I have utmost respect for people who employ teams, because that is a whole thing in itself.
It is, yes.
It really is.
The job would be a lot easier if it wasn't for staff and clients.
That's right. You're so true.
Yes.
Tell me what you're proud of, Steve.
Oh, well, surviving for 5 years. I say surviving. We've been reasonably successful, really. You look at where we're at now.
You've done some great work.
Kept the team together mostly. Had a few people fall by the wayside, but that's just the nature of business, unfortunately. But we've got to 5 years. We've got a lot of clients that come back to us again and again and again, which is really good. That shows that they're happy with what we do. And working with I say blue chip clients, really, like the two universities, is really good as well. And also the team. I'm proud of the team and the work they do and the standards that they hold themselves up to. It's not just me driving it; they're driving it as well. They want to do the right thing by the clients. They want to do a good job, and because of that, they do a good job. So I'm very proud of Nick and Rob and Key. And latterly, my daughter Caitlin is now working for me. She's helping us do a few things that needed to be done, and she's her OCD is very useful when it comes to some of the tasks I've set for her.
Oh,
so she's
wonderful that you're
driving the quality
in the business.
So that's good.
So
and so it's exciting times. I think I've got some more growth I want to do over the next year or so. I want to try and get probably another 4 or 5 engineers into the team if I can.
Wow, that's quite dramatic growth.
Yeah, it would be very dramatic growth if I can achieve it. I've got 2 hopefully starting before the end of this year, and then another 2 or 3 hopefully during next year, depending on the workload. But that's the plan at the moment. And with the work that's coming up, it's looking pretty solid to the end of the year.
Wonderful.
So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed, because things always change. But fingers crossed we'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, and it's the trajectory, isn't it? Like if you're seeing a good trajectory, of course things can come along and derail that. We know that, but it means you're doing the right things. Sorry.
That's right. I was going to say, I think it's part of it for me is you also get a bit of there's a bit of inertia when you start a business trying to get things moving, but once you've got moving, it kind of gets easier to keep things moving. And I think we've got to a point now where we're gathering a bit of speed and things are starting to happen more quickly for us. So I need to keep that momentum going, really. And that's my focus right now.
You're absolutely right, and that's something I talk about, with people that I work with from a content marketing perspective, is that those first few months, even first years, it can feel like hard work, but then it gathers that momentum, and it really does take off.
And you've got to try and keep your eye on things, because suddenly you're finding that you're losing ground because things are moving so quickly if you're not careful.
That's right. That's absolutely right. What are you working on right now? Like, obviously things are going well. You're growing your team. Are there some projects that you're particularly excited about right now?
I think the Lincoln one, getting into the meat of the design on the Lincoln one is probably key for us. But we've just finished an office fit out design that's going to be in a new build office tower on Cathedral Square, so it's quite a high profile location. So I'm quite pleased that we got the chance to do that work, and that's something that's the first office fit out we've done for a while. So it's good from that perspective, and hoping to get some more work in that space as well. But I think that, and just trying to keep the momentum going in that space, try and get more of that kind of smaller scale projects that are relatively quick to turn around is good for us as well. Big projects that last a long time are great, but you need the other smaller fill-in projects as well, just to keep everybody busy. Because sometimes bigger projects can slow down for a period of time while decisions are made, and you need to make sure you've got enough work in there to backfill. So that's kind of my focus right now is making sure our order book looks very healthy. Nice. And that'll be me through till the end of this financial year in March next year is my main focus. So that next financial year from 1st of April onwards is busy, hopefully. That's the plan.
Very best of luck with that goal.
Thank you.
Sounds like you are doing really well.
Doing my best.
Before we wrap up, Steve, is there anything, we've talked lots about your business, obviously, because this was a celebration of 5 years of doing great work, but is there anything that you would like to talk about that's more personal, because, that is such a critical part of our business. And one of the things I admire about you is that you talk about how you're feeling about things, and you've shared, your mental health journey, and you share stories about your family, and I love that. And so I just wondered if there's anything.
Well, I guess sort of what I've realised recently, and it's kind of a strange realisation for me, really, is that the older I get, the more socialist I become, which is
it's only natural.
It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. But I'm working on a governance board for another charity, which is a mental health charity again, and I'm enjoying helping them through some transition that they're going through. But I've also I've got involved with a charity called Orange Sky, which is a homeless charity that was started in Australia. And what they do is they provide a mobile shower and washing service for homeless people. So they've got the ability to wash themselves and wash their clothes, and feel a bit more connected to their communities, and I think that's something for me that is, I was looking for something to do that would help homelessness, because I feel like we shouldn't have anybody that needs to live on the street. We're a wealthy country, really, and there shouldn't be any of our citizens that have no option other than to sleep on the street. And I think that homelessness is a sign of a community that's not fully working as it should, and I want to do my bit in that space. So that's something I do. I volunteer once a fortnight to help with the vans and helping homeless people like that. And I'm looking for other ways that I can help as well, because I think that I'm fortunate that I've got a job that has looked after me for 40 years now, and I feel like there's a responsibility to give something back to the community that I'm part of, and be a bit more connected to it myself, not just for the homeless guys, but for myself as well, to be a bit more part of the community I live in, because I think we run the risk of hiding in our houses and separating ourselves from those around us, and we shouldn't do that. We're social animals. We need to be part of a community. And definitely. I think trying to do something to help others that are less fortunate than you is a good thing to do.
Definitely. And thank you for reminding me about that, Steve, because when I started my business, I pulled out of my community commitments to focus on the business, because I knew it was going to need a big push. But now that I'm 3 years in, it's time that I did what you just talked about and kind of turn my view outwards again. Stop being so self-centered. So that is
well, I think you need, when you're running a business, reminder. It does take up a lot of time, and it's only really in the last year or so that I've started to get some free time to think about other things. So that's why I'm starting to do stuff, because I've now got some time to do it. And I think it needs to be the right time. You need to have the right amount of energy and be available to do what needs to be done. If you try and do it when you're really stressed about other things, you're not going to add the value you want to add.
That is very true.
So it needs to be the right time for sure.
I'm really glad that you feel it's the right time for you. That's another wonderful sign that the business is going well. Yay.
Okay.
Well, congratulations, Steve.
Thanks, Lizzie. It's been, as always, good to chat to you.
It's always lovely to chat to you.
Thank you for listening to my podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts, with me, Steve Penny. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation, and I look forward to sharing my next conversation with you in the future. Thank you.